Thanks for listening to the NVTV podcast, produced by Neuqua Media.
Welcome to this episode of the NVTV podcast. I'm Arda. On today's show, we have Mr. Voller, a government teacher here at Neuqua Valley. Thank you for being here today.
Yo, thanks for having me. This is fun.
So how long have you been teaching here at Neuqua Valley, specifically government?
Yeah, 2001 is when I first started. I was hired by Dr. Burkett. And been teaching in the social studies department since then. So American government, U.S. history, AP U.S. history, kind of almost a little bit of everything.
What do you actually cover within your government course? Is it just like government in general, or do you get into the specifics of like how certain candidates pulled more people to their side?
Yeah, well, we do obviously cover the basics. It is, a graduation requirement class, so we do get into the executive branch, legislative branch. We cover the Supreme Court. We go over certain court cases, but it's super fun to be teaching the class now. Just to answer your question about candidates, it's a election year, and so it's been nice to kind of bring in some current events and talk about some applicable things that we've talked about in class and carry it over to real world, real life, political discourse that's happening.
Now, like you said, you're teaching this since 2001.
Yeah.
Politics is still going, and we still got a country to run.
Right.
Has the way that you've teach the class changed since back then?
Oh yeah, I mean it every 4 years we're talking about a new president or maybe a new candidate for president. So that has definitely changed. There's always 4 years you're getting into some real world discussion, and politics has changed, and I think that's the ebb and flow of who's in office. Is it a Democrat? Is it a Republican? Are they going to change policies from previous presidents? So it's always changing. There's obviously going to be some staple things you talk about because the executive branch and the judicial branch, those things are always going to be the same. The Constitution is always evolving, but there's still going to be some staples that aren't going to change. But I think the biggest change would be just every 4 years you're going to potentially have a new president. So that's the change, really.
Yeah, all these new presidents, they have new budget, new ways they want to spend the budget, new orders that they want to put into place.
Yeah.
And you're a person, a citizen, a part of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have your own views on these policies, these orders, who's running? Is it difficult to keep them separate from your class's curriculum?
Yes, it is hard. Because you might get a president that creates a law or a policy that you personally don't agree with, or money is being spent elsewhere that you think is that shouldn't be spent there. So it is hard. It is hard to keep mine and I'm sure other teachers' personal opinions out of it, because you don't want kids to walk in and feel obligated to have to believe what you believe, right? And that's the kind of way I have always taught my classes. I keep it pretty much down the middle, but just let my students choose which side of that spectrum they want to join. So here's what the Democrats think, here's what the Republicans think, here's these independent parties that are out there, and just kind of leave the door open for them. But there's been some times where students have flat out asked what political party that I affiliate myself with, and I've done a pretty good job dodging that question.
Just that's a good question. What political party do you affiliate with?
Exactly. Well, both parties are still, So there's definitely ways to dodge it, and but
so if I ask you now, you're not going to tell me?
No, I think there's positives to both political parties. Yeah, but and the last thing you do is you what you don't want is a kid to go home and talk to their parents and be like, Mr. Voller said this, this, and this, and all of a sudden parents are calling you or calling your department chair saying, oh, you have a teacher who is a hardcore such and such, and all they do is talk about conservative.
They're trying to persuade me.
Yeah, exactly. They're trying to brainwash my kid. So that's what you want to avoid. But it's hard. It is, and I get that question all the time. But yeah, it's difficult for sure.
I don't know how active some of your classes are because unfortunately the one that I'm in is pretty quiet.
We have some kids that are pretty quiet, yeah. And that's hard too. And I think that's just like every class. You know, I think it could be your math class or science class or whatever. And, you know, you try to throw questions out or like today in class, I'm going to show you guys a picture. I'm going to ask you guys what you guys think about it. And hopefully, well, maybe you can raise your hand and start the discussion. You can get the ball rolling. But yeah, that's hard too because, you know, teachers have a passion for their subject, right? I don't care what it is. It could be anything. And you want to carry that passion over to your students. But yeah, there are some days where you're just like, hello, is this thing on? Like I'm talking to myself up here. And I get it. I mean, it's a class where, you know, kids, it's not really their thing yet, you know, because for a lot of students, they kind of live in a 3-foot world and politics is not in that 3-foot world. So we try to do things to kind of make it applicable. And like I said, now being an election year, 2024, there's a lot of things that you can, you know, bring into the classroom that might spark some discussion that you would, hopefully kids would like to respond to.
Now, sparking discussion is great, but if a student starts actually going into politics,
Oh, yeah.
like, oh my gosh, Trump is gray or Biden is gray and all these sides, do you have to start veering the conversation away, or is it okay coming from a student?
I mean, as long as it's respectable, you know, if they're respectful about what they're saying and they're not pinpointing certain students and they're being, you know, they're not saying things that are inappropriate, I'll let a kid talk for sure. You know, I've had kids who are very Republican, very Democrat, or, you know, not affiliated with any party, and I'll let them say their thing, right? Because I think sometimes that might spark discussion, right? But if it gets out of hand, then obviously you have to shut that down pretty quick. But yeah, I'll let kids talk. I don't see why not.
That's good because kids they hear politics from almost like two different sources.
Sure.
One, their family, and then at school and their friends and or whatever other extracurricular.
Right. And it is tricky because, you know, most kids just naturally will gravitate towards their parents, their political socialization. A lot of it comes from, you know, home, which is totally natural. And I think once kids leave and explore and are on their own and they're kind of away from their parents, that's when things could change, or that's when things could really sink in and be like, oh man, my parents were right, or or no, like I've been on a college campus or in the workforce or here and there, and what my parents were saying, I don't see that at all. So I think it can go both ways. But you're right, kids most of the time will walk into class and they'll have, you know, an ideology, but a lot of it does come from home.
Because I think that contributes to like most learning that students or kids come. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, where a lot of kids get their
initial information.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Whether that's politics or like cooking or like anything in life, they're initially getting everything from their parents.
Right.
But the moment they step outside, go like their first night away from home or their first time driving a car, they realize, oh, geez, this is different. This ain't how my mom told me to do it.
Or they were right. You know, all the times, you know, even with my own children, I have 3 girls at home, and you know, my oldest is 17, and sometimes she'll come home and be like, yep, yeah, mom, yeah, dad, you were right. And it's not about politics; it's about just life. You know what I mean? But students that walk into any classroom, I think, already have maybe a preconceived notion about something because that's all they've heard, and it's from home. And that, like I said, it changes. It definitely would change. As soon as you walk into that dorm room and meet your roommate who's from a different part of the world or a different part of the country, and you start chatting with that person, and you're like, whoa, never thought of it about like, you know, with like that. Because let's be honest, kind of here where we're at geographically, we're kind of in a bubble, you know. And as soon as you leave that bubble, things can change for sure.
I completely agree because like in Europe, all the countries it's almost like states. It's almost, our situation is we have our country and then we have states within it. I know countries in Europe have states as well, but what it almost looks like to American is that Europe is the country. And then the real countries within Europe are the states.
Sure.
And people over there are able to experience different cultures more easily than us. We have this huge chunk of land that all is America.
Yeah.
And we have different diverse groups within America.
Sure.
But that's still completely different than actually going to another country and living their experiences.
Yeah, and I think you can drive south, and you can drive east, you can drive west, and you'll see political advertisements that will change drastically. You'll see signs that will, advertisements, not just political, but just advertisements that'll be very conservative, very liberal. So, I think also too where you live geographically, and since all the students for the most part live here in Naperville, I think there's kind of a
Naperville bubble.
Yeah, and I think there's typically Naperville tends to be Republican, and so I think there's a lot of which is fine, and that's just where we live. A lot of students walk in with a kind of Republican conservative-ish mindset, and that again could come from home, but that's not every student, right? We definitely have students that are a little more liberal and follow more of the Democratic Party, but yeah, I think geographically speaking, where you live can play a huge part in that.
Because politics is all about perspective.
Sure.
And do you think Neuqua does a good job at showing students other perspectives and showing, hey, you're eligible to vote. This politic is doing this now, and these are the new policies that are being put in place by our current president.
Right. And I know, just speaking from our social studies department, I know a lot of the teachers that teach the American government class like to bring in real world, from both sides of the aisle, so to speak, topics. Our school, our district, or our department does a good job of bringing in volunteers to get students registered to vote, which I think helps. And it's not, it's not pressure to when you vote now you have to vote Republican, or when you vote now you have to vote Democrat. It's like no, here we're going to be sitting at a table in the rotunda, bring a couple forms of ID, and all we're going to do is register you to vote. After that, you're totally on your own to vote for whoever you want to vote for. So I think they do. Our school and our department does do a good job to being open, right? I don't think you can judge a kid based off of what political party they affiliate themselves with. But to give them the opportunity to exercise that right to vote, I think is a responsibility of us professionally to get kids registered. And the state of Illinois has actually made it even easier to vote or to register to vote. So let's say you're a 16-year-old sophomore who just gets your driver's license. You go to the DMV, and this law just passed. You get your driver's license, go to the DMV, fill out the paperwork. They'll hold on to that paperwork for 2 years. And then when you turn 18, that paperwork then gets officially filed, and then you're automatically registered to vote.
Oh wow, that's really convenient.
Very convenient. So if you don't register at your high school or here at high school, if you don't register when you're 18, I mean, you can literally get it done at 16, and it just kind of waits in a queue. And then as soon as you turn 18, it gets, like I said, filed and sent. I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that.
I mean, Neuqua Valley is a high school, and I believe that the high school's job is to prep us for everyday life.
Right.
Not just teach us math, English,
Sure.
and whatever else you learn in school.
Yeah.
It's to prepare you to go live in the real world, whether that's college or some other field.
Yeah. Well, and I think, my experience here in the last 20 plus years is been that. I think, you're trying to provide opportunities for students to become just good humans and good people, and have that tool belt and have those tools in your tool belt, so that when you leave Neuqua Valley, you can be a productive citizen, no matter what you're in, like you said, right? But I think in my experiences being here, I think we do that, right? So it's important, I think, for schools, especially high schools, to put kids in that position to be successful.
Talking about what Neuqua's been doing with bringing in volunteers, what are the current? Am I able to register at 17 to vote?
Yep. So let's see. In November, we had some volunteers that came in and registered 17-year-olds. So you can still register it if you go to, I can't think of the website. I think it's like I'll have to look it up. Maybe Illinois.gov, that's what it is, to register to vote. You can go online and do it, even though that you are 17. Because if the trick is if you're going to be 18 before the national election in November, then you can register.
Okay,
So,
great.
Yeah.
So anyone, as long as you're 18 by the actual election, you're
Yep.
able to vote and register.
And then vote. Yep.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Now, I got one last question
Sure.
for you before we wrap this up.
Uh-huh.
Politics is all about, one, making yourself look good in front of the camera.
Yeah.
But then once you get inside of
Yeah.
the actual position, holding your responsibilities well, and actually performing.
Yeah.
But first, like I said, you have to look good.
Right.
Do politics target, like, our demographic in a certain way?
Teens?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at the use of social media, right? When President Trump ran for his first time, that's all he used was social media, because he knew that demographic of voters, 17, soon to be 18-year-olds, that's not all you do, but that's how you get your information, right? People are getting news from TikTok and getting news like that, and not turning on a mainstream, news platform. So, they're absolutely tailoring to your needs, and tailoring to what you guys use, not just you, but what people use, which is their phones, right? And I think you see campaign ads that are targeted towards, high school graduates or soon-to-be graduates. You might get a candidate up there talking about loan forgiveness, right? If you're a student going to a 4-year campus and you know that you're going to be able to vote, and this person is talking about wiping clean student debt, well, how better of a campaign platform is that? So, but you're right. It's tricky though once you get into the White House, in particular, and again maybe in other offices too, but especially the White House. Okay, you said all this. Let's see if it's gonna
make it happen.
Make it happen. Yeah, for sure. So, but yeah, it's a game. I mean, politics and running for especially the White House, it's a game, and who can play that game best?
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Mr. Voller.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening to NVTV Podcast. Podcast is produced by media students here at Neuqua Valley. Please enjoy the rest of your day.